Larry, FSB, director of FSB in Russia, if I'm not mistaken, FSB, the intelligence in Russia
Yeah.
gave information about that the British and Ukrainians are planning to sabotage in Turkish, Turkish stream, you know, the pipeline of
Right.
Turkey. What is that? Do you think these people with this sort of mindset, they're planning to put an end to the conflict? I don't see
No, no,
that
no.
happening in the mind of
No.
Europeans.
Yeah, no, they're desperate, and desperate people do desperate things. You know, the Europe right now is the equivalent of a drowning man in the ocean, who's thrashing about trying to grab something to stay afloat. But um, you know, the Russia has increased the ops tempo, and you know, it looks like last year the general staff wanted to turn off all the lights in Ukraine, but Putin sort of said, "No, you know, let's give it time." Putin now has signed off on that, and you know, Ukraine has already lost 60% of its ability to generate power and sustain electricity. I suspect we're going to see that number creep up around 80, 90% within the next 4 to 5 weeks. Then Ukraine's, they're back living in the 18th century, uh, and they're going to have to break out the canvas.
You know, something else, Nima, I was just doing the math in my head, and I'm not too good at that anymore. But he said something about 2,000 tomahawks.
Yeah.
I'm sorry. Last time I checked the inventory, it wasn't even quite that high for the United States. So I don't know where he's going. What's he going to do? Turn to Raytheon, Lockheed, whomever's doing them now, and say, redo that production line and come on, put them on. And he's tried that with some other weaponry, and they have not been very cooperative. They'd love to make the money, but they can't find the places in the country that will accept their ancillary activities to do it.
Right.
So they're stuck with the production lines that they have, which are basically at what we call LRIP at this time, low rate initial production numbers. They've gone down to where it's just barely profitable to make them. So I don't know where he's getting his information, but it's not from the people who tell the truth.
Larry, who's calling the shots in Europe? Who's behind the scene? Who has the leverage on Donald Trump?
Actually, I don't think anybody in Europe has any leverage over Trump. You remember, Trump's the one that made all them show up at the Gaza signing ceremony. You had Macron and Starmer. And Trump didn't even remember the Starmer was there. Maloney was there. They're all sitting there backbenchers. I described that whole fiasco that took place in Sharm el Sheikh. It was like holding a wedding without the bride and groom being present. Okay, you didn't have the Palestinians, and you didn't have the Zionists. So how can you have a peace agreement signing when the only one signing is Donald Trump? And everybody went along with this charade. The Europeans, nobody in Europe right now, particularly the big three, Friedrich Merz, Emmanuel Macron, Keir Starmer, and even Maloney in Italy, none of them have economies growing above 2%. They're all less than, most of them are less than 1.5 to below 1%. In contrast with the BRICS countries that were represented there at that meeting in Sharm el Sheikh, they're growing in excess of 4%. So they're doing fine economically. So it just goes back to show that the Europeans now are utterly, totally dependent upon the United States, and so they're not going to do anything to try to irritate Trump. They may not like Trump, but boy, they need the United States. Without U.S. money, they're going to be in trouble.
But they have something that would be interesting for Donald Trump and his administration. Here is what Pete Hegseth said, Carl, together with the Secretary General of NATO.
Part of that, of course, is Pearl, is the initiative where European countries buy U.S. weapons, transfer to NATO for the fight in Ukraine to bring peace to that conflict. And if there's anything we've learned under President Trump, is the active application of peace through strength.
This video clip is not from 2 years ago, 1 year ago, 6 months ago. It was just the day before yesterday.
Oh, it's incredible that we let our leaders get away with lies like Hegseth is insinuating there. We can't even fulfill our commitments, some of them now quite long to be fulfilled, to Taiwan, which is arguably a more important move than giving weapons to Ukraine in the long term. We can't even fulfill our promises to Taiwan. Where is PD going to activate the industrial base to the point where it can do what they're insinuating they're going to do for the Europeans and ultimately for Ukraine? They can't. So what are we doing here? We're playing a game. We're playing a game of rhetoric, and it's a dangerous game because we're not working assiduously behind the scenes on some kind of peace agreement. All Trump's doing is palavering. And he palavers one way on Monday and another way on Tuesday and forgets everything by Friday. So where are we going is my huge question. And it's involving a lot more than just Ukraine now, because it's very much looking like that the Southern Command commander stepped down, God bless his soul, or is staying until December, I understand it now, for the very same reasons that General Fred Warner left the same command when it was preparatory to Operation Just Cause. Well, we are preparing to do something in Venezuela with military force, and we're doing it based on an Israeli agent who just won the Nobel Prize for Peace and her coterie. This is incredible. Laura Loomer looms large in Trump's intelligence picture.
Larry, how important Venezuela is for Russia? We know that there is a strategic, partnership between the two countries. And how do you find the tone of the Russians toward the case of Venezuela?
Well, I don't think they're going to. While they've signed a strategic agreement and have friendly relations with Venezuela, I don't see the Russians threatening to go to war with the United States over Venezuela. But I think they've armed them and given them about every chance opportunity to be able to resist. And I think the United States is making a very calculated mistake in thinking that it can easily overwhelm. I mean, Trump yesterday announcing the covert action that the CIA is now involved to overthrow, to effect a regime change in Venezuela. It's like, I don't think he understands the meaning of the word covert because it's supposed to be a secret. You're not supposed to advertise it. It's supposed to be classified, done behind the scenes where you have plausible deniability. Now he's accepting full blame and full responsibility for this. And it's, it's foolish. We can't beat the Houthis. And so we're going to take on Maduro in Venezuela. Good luck with that.
And Nima, I got to say, the Mossad must love that revelation because they've been in there trying to overthrow Maduro for at least a decade.
Yeah.
I think we can understand the behavior of Donald Trump because he wants to brag about it if they succeed in Venezuela. Because if he doesn't talk about it, who's going to take the credit for that?
Right.
It was me. I told you that I'm going to achieve something in Venezuela. But Carl, you mentioned the situation with Admiral, the commander, Admiral Alwyn, Halsey, he decided to step down. What is going on? It's just about him, or something bigger than that is going on within the military?
Well, I think the prima facie evidence, at least, is much the way it was for Fred Warner at the time of Just Cause. I think he has two problems with orders that have been coming down. And this is my guess, but I think it's an educated guess. He has problems with the extrajudicial killings on the high seas that have been taking place. And he has problems with what he is being briefed on with regard to possible military action against Venezuela. What I'm concerned with right now, I know his deputy fairly well. I don't know what they're calling. We used to call them political advisors. Now they're called diplomat in charge or something like that. Anyway, they got a highfalutin name now. But what it is a senior State Department career, usually, maybe not quite career, ambassador, who comes for their final tour on active duty, if you will, to be an advisor to a combatant command commander. I'm wondering what she's saying right now. I'm wondering what all of that crew around this admiral are saying to themselves right now with regard to illegal orders that they have to this point been executing, and possibly an invasion of another country or military action against another country that really doesn't fit in their calculus. So how many more people are going to leave, or how disturbing is this going to be? I'm a little bit puzzled at his decision to stay until December, because I think the action is probably going to happen before December, or at least something that's visible. So it's confusing right now. I don't know exactly how to interpret it.
Larry, Zelensky is in Washington, and we've learned yesterday from the British outlet, they're talking about the British news, that media, and they're talking about Ukraine may decide to import the U.S. oil and gas, and they may use the pipeline they have in Ukraine to send them to other countries. Is that because how can they afford buying the U.S. oil and gas when Europeans are not capable of doing this?
Yeah, well, they're going to pay more. I mean, the U.S. gas and oil are more expensive. It's more costly. Nothing else, just shipping costs alone to get it out of the United States over there. So yeah, it makes no economic sense. And again, Trump has been engaged in a lot of prevarication, I guess we'll call it, fancy word for lying, claiming that India has promised them that they're not going to continue buying Russian oil. Not true. In fact, when they're buying the oil, they're paying for it with their own currency through China. So the Chinese currency is becoming sort of a new petrodollar right now. So this to cut a deal with Ukraine on gas and oil is just a reminder that even the resources that they had, because remember, Ukraine was, I think, ranked as like the 5th or 6th largest country in the world in terms of natural resources prior to the start of the special military operation. Now a significant portion of those resources are now under the control of the Russians in the eastern part of the country. So the United States can send them gas and oil, but it's going to be a costly proposition for them.
And this is another Trump, extended middle finger to the hoax that is the climate lobby, because the ships that carry LNG, for example, from the United States are some of the most polluting ships in the world. They just give it off massively as they're going across the Atlantic. Not only does it cost more, but it also is more polluting. But they don't seem to care. They just don't seem to care.
Carl, which part is more important? I think in the mind of Russians, they tried. Many people are criticizing. Not many people. Few of experts are criticizing Russia to go to talk with the United States using their somehow